This video is going to show the basics of how to store and trigger a path in the external dispatcher application. So in the simulator here, I'm going to create a train, and we will need an oncoming train, so let's create one to run. Let's make him eastbound. So we've got our trains. So in the previous video we showed clearing a path simply by right-clicking on a train, right-clicking on a block somewhere, and then left-clicking on the train to clear that path. Very simple. So the difference with storing a path is that you create the path the same way. So you right-click on the train, right-click on block somewhere. When you're happy with the path, instead of left-clicking on the train to clear that path immediately, left-click on a block anywhere in the route, and that block will be designated as the trigger block. And so what will happen is this path will become stored for that train, and when any other train hits that trigger block, that path will then clear. So a couple of differences here. When a train does not have a path stored and you left click on it, it'll highlight, it'll turn yellow, and you'll see the clear path ahead of it shown in yellow arrows. If a train does have a path stored, it'll show a white box around it, and when you left click on it, it'll show you the elements of any stored path rather than showing you the clear path ahead. And so the elements of a stored path are the start block, which will be a solid circle. If a train is associated with the path, it will be shown with a white box around it. Then there'll be all the blocks involved in the path, and they'll have orange arrows. And then there'll be the trigger block, which is designated with a circle around the block. So when it's not highlighted, you see the trigger block will be white, and all the path elements will have an aqua circles around them. So you can see at a glance where this path is. So at any time to see this path, you can either left click on the train, or you can left click on any one of the elements involved in the path. Another way is you can use this paths button here, and the keyboard shortcut for that is P, and that will show you all the paths that are stored anywhere in the route, and you can go through them one by one, left click to highlight them, and so on. So to clear a path that's been stored, there are two ways. One is that you right click on the train, and that will immediately clear that path. Another way is to right click on the trigger block, and so let's recreate this path. Let's store it again by left clicking our trigger block. So if I right click the trigger block, that will clear that path as well. And so to watch this path in action, let's store that path one more time, and let's watch what happens when our oncoming train hits the trigger block. So we're going to use 15 times multiplier, so this will happen very quickly. At the start button to get our train moving. So when this train hits the trigger block, that will cause that stored path to be cleared, and then that will line our train in the siding out of Woodford and onto the main. And there we go. And this is exactly the same as if you had cleared the path, but you waited until this train entered the main, and then you manually cleared the path just by left clicking on the train. And so what this allows you to do is to set up meets and line trains out of siding well ahead of when the oncoming train actually arrives. So let's delete these. So that shows you how to store a path using a train as the starting block. Just as with clearing a path, you don't actually need a train for the first block. You can just pick any block, create a path, and you can store it just by left clicking on a different block somewhere to designate the trigger. And hey presto, there's another stored path. You can left click on any element to highlight that that path, so you can see which direction it's going, and to clear it you have to right click on the trigger block. There's no other way to clear a block that started, a stored path that started on a block, because there's no train involved. And you can create all kinds of stored paths. So right click, left click, right click, left click, and we have stored paths all over the place. So if you use this paths button here, it will show you all of the stored paths in Aqua, you can left click on any one of them to highlight the elements. And so if you have multiple paths that are close by each other, lots of trigger blocks all crammed in there, and you want to know which trigger belongs to which path, if you just highlight it, it will turn orange for the highlighted path. So I can clear these one by one by right-clicking on the trigger blocks. There's also this new clear button here, and what that will do is that will wipe out every single stored path, and it will also wipe out any signal rules that you may have set. So for example, if you want this signal to drop to red when a train goes by, if I click the clear button, that will clear all the stored paths, all the signal rules, and so when I go back and look at this signal again, it's back to the default. So the purpose of the clear button is simply I'm no longer dispatching, and I don't want my rules that I may have set up to interfere with the next person who's dispatching. So to summarize, that shows you very quickly how to create a stored path using either a train as the starting point or just a block as the starting point, how to clear stored paths by right-clicking on either the original train or the trigger block, how to view all the stored paths by either left-clicking on any element in the path or just using the paths key, the paths button here. And one last thing to show you, let's grab a train again. So we have a train here. So when you store a path, you also get this little up and down arrow and this number here. This only appears if you use a train as the starting point for the stored path, not if you use a block as the starting point. And what this does, if you just left click on this just to increase and decrease that number, that just says how many trains need to pass by and hit the trigger block before this path will execute. And to show you that in action, let's set that to 2. So now 2 trains have to go by before that path will be cleared. So let's create some trains here. So we need 2 westbounds. So there's 1, there's 2. So if I just clear a path for these westbounds, straight through the main line there. So they'll both start moving. This second train here is obviously waiting for the block at Marcel to be clear. So as this train goes by Weilong, watch what happens to this number. Every time a train hits that trigger, that number will decrease. When it hits 0, then the path will actually be executed. So there goes the first train, it's hit our trigger block, that number dropped from 2 to 1. Here comes the second train. And as soon as this second train hits that trigger block, then the path will execute, and there we go. And so now as soon as that interlocking is clear, our train in the siding will automatically get a clear path and be able to exit on its own. And there we go, that's all there is to it. So one last thing to show you. Let's get rid of these guys. Delete, delete, delete. So if we have a train that's facing a red light, it will show up pink, meaning, hey, I think this train needs the dispatcher's attention. As we saw in a previous video, one way to eliminate the pink color is to line a path through the interlocking, and if the interlocking is occupied, these elements will just keep flashing until it's clear. And as long as anything in the interlocking ahead is flashing, the train will no longer be pink. Another way is if you store a path. So when you store a path, it's no longer pink because the dispatcher application knows that the dispatcher has done something with this train. And so it no longer needs your attention. So as a dispatcher, all you need to be doing is scanning the board for anything that's pink. And if it is pink, either lining a train out using a path immediately or storing a path for that train, and it will no longer be pink. And that's all there is to it. So in another video, we'll go through examples of how you might use stored paths.